A young girl stands in her room crying and distraught. As she stares into her phone camera, she sobs and can barely utter her words, saying,
I have to do it.
She begs her interlocutor that she doesn't want to remove her clothes in front of the camera, but her pleas fall on the deaf ears of an unknown man on the other side of the screen, who turns a blind eye to her pain and orders her to perform a sex act on herself, because otherwise she must abide by the consequences. Unfortunately, that man on the other side of the screen was a police officer. Nowadays, we live in a world increasingly full of disguises and false identities, dangerous identities that are often hidden in digital profiles on the internet that show apparently harmless people, but who in reality are atrocious and inhuman criminals capable of destroying lives without even exercising physical force, only using intimidation and psychological manipulation. A game where the hero has become the villain. And it seems that in this century, no one, absolutely no one, is safe, even in their own homes, because anyone can enter and abuse us. Without even setting foot inside, it can even hurt us without putting a single hand on us. Since the aggressor can be miles away physically, but their evil intentions can be very, very close to you and me when they approach us from the web, using the proximity offered by the internet, through a computer or a mobile device, as did the pedophile police of the dark web, Lewis Edwards, who took advantage of the internet and web applications to sexually subjugate hundreds of girls and teenagers. The year 2020 was not an easy year for anyone after the pandemic that hit the whole world and made everyone lock themselves at home for months. A time where for many, the main activity of the day-to-day was to be connected to different mobile applications as a means of entertainment to combat the boredom of being locked up, something that seemed to be harmless. So many parents let their children use their phones, tablets, and computers without paying much attention to what they were doing or who their little ones were talking to. During the day, a lack of supervision that many cybercriminals, like Lewis Edwards, took advantage of to harass and force many children, and especially girls and young minors, to perform sexual practices virtually. Practices ranging from posing in front of the camera without clothes to self-penetration, where they not only had to insert their fingers, but any object that came to mind to their pedophile friend on the web inside their vagina or anus, who recorded them from his computer and then spread the pornographic content in the famous and dangerous dark. But what is the dark web? The dark web is not an imperial or elite city, but a filthy hole where many people, even of a high class, hide to do illegal activities. In other words, the dark web is a part of the internet that allows users to hide their identity and location from other people and law enforcement agents. As a result, the dark web can be used to sell stolen personal information, and so these criminals enter the internet through software that prevents them from being traced, as it hides the place from which they connect and the computer from which they do it, as well as the pages they enter are not linked to conventional search engines, such as Google or Yahoo, so everything they do within the web or within the internet is under total anonymity. This software is called Tor, a program that destroys, erases, or disperses the navigation data, which allows you to navigate without being able to detect what you were doing or not inside the web. As it was just this program that Lewis Edwards installed on his computer and on his cell phone to be able to approach his victims, and if any of them dared to report him, he knew that the police could never find his whereabouts, because thanks to this program, all his connection data were out of the database of the web. Besides, by using this software, he could easily commercialize child pornography without any inconvenience and without anyone knowing that he, a man belonging to the police, was commercializing nudes and sexual videos of hundreds of girls who had fallen into the game of his manipulation and threats. And they were there receiving orders and being sex slaves of someone they didn't even know, and all accepting the request of a stranger who seemed nice in his social networks, but who turned into a monster who did not stop hurting them even though they cried and asked him to stop disturbing them. But he kept forcing them to create sexual content, being aware of all the damage he was causing them. But how did these girls agree to be friends with a man much older than them? Well, as we said at the beginning, nothing is what it seems, and not all the profiles we see on the internet are real. So Lewis Edwards hid himself by using a profile picture of a teenager to trick his victims into sending him explicit images. The boy in the photo was handsome and looked like a famous and irresistible boy. So the girls were flattered that a boy like the one they saw in the fake profile was talking to them and wanted them, because Lewis initially projected himself as a charming teenager, and as he gained the trust of the girls, he started to make them fall in love, and once they took the bait, he would ask them for sexy pictures, and then without any clothes on, and they blinded by his fake virtual love, would ascend, without knowing that this was the beginning of a real hell. Where this pedophile began to demand much more perverted photos and videos if they refused to do so or ignored him, he quickly wrote threatening them, telling them that he would spread the images he already had of them without clothes and touching themselves. So ashamed of what their families and friends might think of these images were published, but loving this man threatened them with death, because if they did not do what he asked them, he would kill them and their family. A crime that was carried out from the Snapchat platform, where 210 became the victims of the perversion and sadism of Louis Edwards, a quantity that added up to 3 long years in which he intimidated them, stealing their privacy, their morals, and innocence. One of them said that during the video calls, Edwards would sit in the dark and show only part of his face, so it was difficult to recognize him. The only thing she could hear him clearly was Edwards asking them to take nude pictures, sometimes wearing only her school uniform, and to perform the sexual acts he asked to perform, and she would obey as if she were following orders from a film director. Another of his victims commented, "I was just a child. I feel confused, ashamed, disgusted, and have no self-esteem. I lost my innocence. I felt guilty, and I still find it hard to trust people." A statement that makes clear the psychological damage which sex criminals like Edwards leave on their victims. But how did they find out if it is assumed that in the dark web identities are anonymous and everything that is done there is incognito? Well, at the end of the day, between heaven and earth, there is nothing hidden. Although there is technology in favor of the criminals, every criminal always makes a mistake that ends up exposing him. Well, in December 2022, Edwards made the mistake of performing his perverted activity within the facilities of the South Wales Police. Is that being there at work, he made a bank transaction linked to the download of pornographic images of children on the dark web, which set off alarms within the premises and immediately began a thorough investigation to find out which of the agents was consuming this type of content. And it did not take long to realize that the agent behind the consumption of child pornography was Louis Edwards. So they decided to take the investigation further and decided to raid the police officer's house. And once inside, they reviewed each of his devices, in which they found approximately 4,500 indecent images of children. At the same time, they noticed that the officer had had conversations with 210 girls between the ages of 10 and 16 from November 2020 to February 2023. And of which images of 207 of them were found on his devices. And all this was not only perversion, but a case that links extortion, manipulation, and fear that this generated to their victims, because in one of the video calls that had been saved on your computer is heard a girl distressed and say, "Do I have to do it? I feel obligated." To which he replied, "If you do not do it right now, could go to your house and shoot their parents. So hurry up and take off your clothes and dance for me, or you prefer that I kill your parents." A truly outrageous case for the South Wales Police, who embarrassedly had to notify the community that one of their men was a virtual child molester pervert following his arrest on February 8, 2023. And as expected, the news dismayed and outraged the entire Welsh population, and many others beyond its borders, seeing the magnitude of the crime by someone who is in a position that is supposed to ensure the welfare of people and not to attack them. But before the revealing details of how the case progressed, let's see. Who is Louis Edwards? Louis Edwards was 23 at the time of his arrest and lived in Hywel Tai Cribber, Cefn Glas, in Bridged, with his parents. His solicitor described him as remarkably emotionally immature, and he looked younger than his chronological age. He spent much of his free time on his computer and appeared to live an isolated life. He was described as a young man who had not had a meaningful relationship at his age, due to his lack of emotional maturity and lack of confidence. He was not known to have had relationships and was said to have had struggled with depression and anxiety. He joined South Wales Police in 2021 and was a student at Brigand Police Learning Centre for much of his tenure with the force. When his offences became known, he was working shifts as a police officer and had to contact with members of the public, including a young girl who would become one of his victims. And although Louis Edwards was arrested, he did not have the courage to admit his guilt and denied everything, even though the evidence that was found confirmed that he was a sexual offender. And although he is now behind bars, this will not erase from the minds of his victims all the damage he did. And below, we will reveal part of what some of them told when they were located by the South Wales Police to tell their experience of obeying an internet pedophile. One of them was just 12 years old at the time of the crimes and said she knew Edwards as Jacob, who added her on Snapchat. When they started talking, he said she was pretty and a nice person. He asked her questions about what sport she played and asked her to show him normal pictures of her to continue to admire her beauty. She said he complimented her very much on her attractiveness. She also recalls that she asked Jacob, or rather Edwards, where he went to school, but he never answered her. What he did was say that he had a younger sister who had been having seizures and was in and out of the hospital. She also said that his alleged sister had poor mental health and self-harmed, and since she was always sick to him, her parents paid no attention. Edwards would tell his victim that she had given him a reason to live. The young girl also commented that when he sent her pictures of himself, they were always the same 2 pictures he had already sent. He never sent other than those 2. The man in the picture had a thin, set jaw, brown hair, blue eyes, tan skin, and a black or dark purple school uniform. The victim pointed out, a man who was definitely not Lewis Edwards. To all this, the same girl confessed that after a while of conversation, Edwards asked her to make a video call on Snapchat, and he only showed half of his face, and the place was dark, and that when she asked him why the lights were not on, he said they were broken. During the video calls, they talked about his horses, his competitions, and he said he liked soccer and rugby, and that he was very tall. She also said that he told her that he was 13 or 14 years old. She does not remember well. Up to this point, her dealings with the offender were normal. But later, the young woman said that after talking to her for 2 or 3 weeks, the man started asking her for photographs and said he wanted to see any part of her body without clothes. She claimed that the man begged and threatened her to give him the photos. And although she initially refused to do so, he made her feel guilty and told her that he would hurt himself if she didn't send him the photos, arguing that the photos would help him with his problems, as she was the only reason he lived. And finally, she ended up sending the photo he wanted, as she confesses that despite not having seen many photos of him, she fell in love. The teenager estimates that, over time, she sent Edwards more than 100 images. Most of the images were of full nudity, and most were videos at his request. In some of the videos, the victim said she was clearly crying because she did not want to do what he asked her to do. She also added that sometimes, the next morning, he would apologize to her. He would tell her that he couldn't get away from her because she was so pretty. The victim said the worst thing he did was force her to send about 50 videos in a day, always doing the same thing. She said Edwards told her that if she stopped sending them, he would be forced to upload all the images of her on the internet. On one occasion, Edwards recalls Edwards sent her a video of 2 people having sex and told her to watch it. The people in the video having sex were a young woman and a boy of similar age. Then that if she didn't want him to send one of her videos to her parents, she had to continue to oblige and obey. Other victims were also 12 years old when she was harassed by Edwards. She confesses that when she accepted his Snapchat request, he sent her a picture of his penis, but she ignored him. But he kept texting her to get naked for him, as he wanted to have his erect member by seeing her unclothed pictures. She said that after this, she blocked him. But he reappeared in another chat, telling her that if she did not send pictures, he could come to her house, bomb it, and shoot her parents. The victim tried to ignore him again, but he kept sending her messages and sent her a picture from Google Maps showing her mother's house, saying he knew where she lived. So she had to decide whether to show her breasts and vagina or see her parents dead. So she had no choice but to undress and do as he asked, as she feared for her parents' lives. Continuing with more information, Edwards' youngest victim was 10 years old at the time she was contacted, and a video was recorded on her assailant's computer where the victim could be seen penetrating herself. After this, Edwards sent her a message saying, "Done." He also sent her a message saying, "Good girl, but you know what pictures I want. Take that shirt off and I'll see you sharing everything." In the conversations, it was observed that the man forced her to send videos that included her taking off her underwear and exposing her breasts and genitals. But this was the only thing he asked of her, as a video was found of her penetrating her vagina with 2 different objects. And the victim asked how much longer did she have to do that she didn't want to do it anymore. And he just said, "You will do it until I say so." But that's not the end of all the damage the former police officer did to these minors, as the victim's heartbreaking personal statements read in court make clear the true extent of the devastation Edwards wreaked on the families. One mother, holding back tears as she read her statement in court, said her daughter began self-harming and cutting her wrists. She was not the only one. In their own words, these teenage girls say they lost their innocence at the hands of a man who should have protected them and others through his work. but all he generated for them was panic and pain. In another statement read in court, one of Edward's victims said, "She was only 13 years old at the time she was manipulated and forced to send nude online images to someone I thought was 15 years old. Now I know he is a grown man and a serving police officer. Well, a pedophile rather, something that ends up disturbing much more." Another of her victims of Edward said, "When the police came to the house to tell me I had been talking to an older man, I was very shocked. I came home from school and my father told me the police had been to the house. I don't know what I felt. I really didn't want to believe it. I thought it was a handsome 14-year-old boy, and I couldn't believe it. He didn't sound like a man. He sounded like a boy my age. He lied to me, and I really cared about him, and I felt sad because he cheated on me. A few weeks later, I tried to commit suicide. I didn't want to live anymore because of everything that had happened. I didn't tell my mom or dad because I thought they would scold me. I remember when we were talking, I felt afraid because he was threatening me, and I felt I had to do what he was asking me to do. But now I regret having fallen into his game because I feel guilty. I had never seen my mom and dad cry so much. I felt guilty and responsible for that. If something happened now, I don't believe in the police anymore because the police are supposed to take care of us, but he didn't take care of me." Another lady said, "When he would text me, I felt really overwhelmed and nervous. I was always waiting for him to ask me to do something, and I never knew when it would happen. Even going out with friends wasn't something I enjoyed anymore because I didn't know when he was going to text me to do something. Because no matter how much I told him I wasn't home, he wouldn't believe I was out. And if I didn't do something he asked me to do at that moment, then he would ask me to do something worse than what he had demanded of me. T always reminded me that if I didn't do it, he would publish everything. So I did what he asked me to do because I was afraid he would publish it on the internet, and I didn't want that. When I was told I was an older guy and a cop, I felt uncomfortable since you're supposed to trust the police." Apart from that, she let everyone in court know that she felt depressed and stressed, that she didn't eat well, and spent a lot of time in her room. She said she was self-harming. She added, "I can't talk to my mom about it because I feel like she's going to be so mad, and I feel so bad when she gets mad and feels worse. I really hate him for what he's done to me. Well, I don't know how to be happy again." The mother of another of Edward's victims said, "This man tore my daughter apart. I feel like she can't open up to people anymore and doesn't trust anyone. She is withdrawn, uncommunicative, gets angry and upset very easily. She has developed anxiety problems. She has had fights with friends, has left home late at night to collect her thoughts. She worries that someone might access personal photos and messages and use them against her. He has suicidal thoughts, says he doesn't want to be here anymore, and has self-harm marks on his legs. She has attended therapy sessions, but has become distant and reserved. She does not trust people she should trust, such as the police. None of the above problems occurred before the incident. This has not only changed her life, but also ours forever," sentenced the stricken mother with tears in her eyes. Another victim during the trial, full of anger, spoke to her assailant, looking him in the eyes, saying, "Every time I received a friend request, I would get nervous and wonder if I was really talking to one of my friends or to you again. You told me I couldn't tell anyone what was happening to me or the threats would come true. I felt alone, scared, and felt that no one could help me, not even my parents. Now I know that wasn't true. I should be worrying about more important things, like my sports and my school exams. Instead, I've had to talk to people about what happened and relive things you did that I've tried to forget. It's hard to concentrate on my school. I know you have done this to so many innocent girls and terrified them so much that they don't want to seek help. Being in the position you are in makes me and my family feel bad. You were supposed to protect us and help us, not abuse us. Seeing where you are now makes me feel relieved, as I know you can't hurt anyone anymore. You're not in control." The whole trial was full of drama, and another mother of one of the victims held back tears as she read her statement in court, saying her daughter started self-harming and cutting her wrists. She said, "I noticed changes in her behavior. She became extremely withdrawn and spent all her time alone in her room. She became very secretive on her phone. We attributed it to her being a teenager and didn't know it was due to her communication with the defendant online. She was so withdrawn that she withdrew from her friends and refused to attend school. I spoke to one of her friends at school and a teacher, and she expressed concern for her. The school contacted me and told me that my daughter attempted suicide in one of the restrooms. I immediately left work and took her to the hospital, where she was seen by the crisis team. After attending, she began self-harming and cut her wrists, which caused superficial marks. I had no idea what the cause of her change in behavior was. We never realized that an adult was blackmailing our daughter online and that it was having a significant impact on her health and daily life. She must have been very frightened, and just thinking about how she alone in her room was suffering unable to tell me. Breaks my heart." This woman in all her fury exclaimed, "Lewis Edwards, I want you to know what you have done to my daughter and my family. You have torn us apart. I cannot put into words how angry I am that you have taken away my daughter's innocence and her childhood, especially when she was in her own home where she should have felt safe. You have broken her to the point that she didn't want to live anymore. I want the court to understand the irreparable damage you have caused us all. Some may say it's an online crime, but what you have done is very real and has had a direct impact on my daughter that I have no idea how to repair. This has shaken my confidence as a mother to the core. This has undermined my ability to be a good mother. If I had known what was going on, I could have helped my poor child, but your threats stole her words and turned her into a self-confident young woman who longed to live her life in a shadow of her former self. This has destroyed her self-confidence, and she will go nowhere without me. Destroyed by an evil man who decided to prey on innocent girls. No matter what happens in the future, you can never erase what you have done. I fear it will affect her forever and affect her ability to make friends and relationships, as her trust has been betrayed." And so, one by one, his victims and their parents testified about the ordeal and chaos that Lewis Edwards had caused them. Edwards had no choice but to accept his guilt and pleaded guilty to 161 felonies, including the crimes of blackmail, enticing a child to engage in sexual activity, compelling a child to view a sexual act, demanding indecent images of children, and making indecent images of children. Susan Ferrier, the defendant's advocate, said, "Nothing my client can say will ever compensate the victims in any way, as his crimes included prolonged, shocking, and predatory offenses against young girls. When he started offending, he undoubtedly got out of control and could not stop himself, knowing it was wrong. So he accepts what he did and knows he faces a very long prison term." Lewis Edwards abused the trust placed in him as a serving police officer, targeting children online in a spate of sustained sexual abuse, forcing them to satisfy his own sexual needs. Edwards' tactics of threatening and blackmailing his victims show the extent of his depraved actions and his lack of remorse towards those he targeted. He believed he was above the law and that his role as a police officer would protect him from being investigated and prosecuted. He was wrong. The Crown Prosecution Service and South Wales Police worked tirelessly to build a strong case against him and achieve justice. It is incredibly distressing that Edwards committed these heinous crimes against children when, as a serving police officer, his role was to protect the vulnerable, and he would have been aware of the devastating impact that sexual abuse can have on young people. Also deeply disturbing is the ease with which he was able to use social media to target children and threaten and blackmail his victims into providing him with explicit material. This case demonstrates why the Online Safety Bill, soon to become law, is just as important as this, as it will require technology companies to design their sites with children's safety as a priority, so that they are less at risk of harm from offenders like Edwards, who today is behind bars, paying multiple concurrent prison sentences, including several life sentences with a minimum sentence of 12 years. Judge Tracy Lloyd Clark said, "It is clear that he not only derived sexual gratification from his crimes, but also enjoyed the power and control he had over these young girls. Edwards will therefore also be subject to an indefinite sexual harm prevention order, which will prohibit him from working with children or vulnerable people and require him to keep his personal details on record with the police." Meanwhile, his victims are receiving psychological therapies in order to overcome what happened and try to turn the page with their families to move forward, trying to get out of their minds what they lived, although we all know that this will be impossible. And although we have not been affected in this crime, the case serves to make us aware of what we do and do not do within the social networks that are on the internet, which have become a perfect medium for crime, where criminals know they do not need to be physically in a place to do evil, because they only need an internet connection and access to the dark web to materialize their heinous and perverted crimes like those that Lewis Edwards committed.